So I'm going to now start. I will call the April 23rd, 2019 meeting to order at 7:06 p.m. and acknowledge that we are meeting on the shared traditional lands of the Coast Salish People. I'm looking for a motion to approve tonight's agenda. Moved by Councillor Kobayashi.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Councillor Baxter. Any error? Or excuse me. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Public participation. I'd like to invite anyone present to take this opportunity to address council, to present concerns or questions of council. Comments pertaining to a matter that has been the subject of a public hearing are prohibited where the bylaws related to the matter have not been presented to council for consideration of adoption. There is a maximum of 20 minutes allocated for public participation. Topics should be addressed briefly to allow other speakers an opportunity to address council. Are there any public participation tonight? Sir.
Good evening, Mayor Martin. I'm Chris Wright, and I live near Ocean View Park. So if I'm counting my fingers and toes correctly, this marks the 6-month anniversary or 6-month mark in your term. So given that the tax rate bylaw and the 5-year financial plan are on this evening's agenda, I'm wondering, at what point in time will members of the public see a finalized strategic priority plan from this council?
Excellent question. And I wish I had a direct answer for you, Chris, but where we're at with this is we do have strategic plans in place. We did do one session of strategic planning. We are planning a second to be a little more thorough and a little more specific. What happened was we ended up with too many agenda items or too many items, so we wanted to get a little more specific. Unfortunately, we got distracted with a couple things with CAO recruitment and that along that lines. I don't know if, I'm looking to staff, have we set a date for the second strategic planning session? We haven't set that yet, but it is coming. So I'm hoping faster than slower, but I will keep you up to date on when that happens. Is there anyone else for public? Seeing none, I am going to move on. Mayor's message. I have several things to discuss today. First of all, we had the Easter egg hunt at Royal Bay Meadow Park. And it was fantastic. It was great to see a majority of council came out, so thank you guys for coming out. I believe, I didn't hear an official count, but I believe we probably were close to 400 to 500 people attended the event. There's a video that you can see on Royal Bay's Royal Bay cablegraph of the kids charging once the ribbon was cut, and you can see me chasing a kid down because he had the scissors, and I was didn't want him to die. So you can see that part of it. But it was a very awesome event, so I very much appreciate, and it's great to see community come out for that. We did receive a letter from the Premier stating that he did support the municipality's request around increased funding for the RCMP with the province, which is awesome. I also received a letter, which I'd just like to read really quickly, from the Royal Colwood Golf Club, which I'm just very excited about. And it's just in regards to the City of Colwood single-use plastic bag bylaw and the story that was in the Times Colonist on the February 27th. And the letter briefly states, it's our understanding that the City of Colwood bylaw banning the use of single-use plastic bags had its first and second reading on February 27th, 2019, and is now proceeding to a public and stakeholders consultation process prior to third reading on this bylaw. We at the Royal Colwood Golf Club fully support this initiative and have already taken the steps of replacing our plastic bags in our retail area with recycled and reusable natural craft paper bags made with 100% recycled fiber, with a minimum of 90% post-consumer content. In addition, we have also replaced our plastic to-go cups with fully combustible, hopefully they're not combustible, compostable cups. That would be horrible. And bottled waters will no longer be available for purchase on the property. Royal Colwood Golf Club is dedicated to minimizing our impact on the environment, which is a lovely letter to receive. In addition, today, I was fortunate enough to have a phone call with the Premier. Premier called, and the call lasted for about a half hour, so I was very happy. He's very interested in what's going on in Colwood. Is very much supportive of, clearly, of the West Shore. discussion, things that the Premier and I discussed today. We discussed the West Shore Ferry. We discussed employment opportunities happening here in the West Shore. We discussed the E&N rail line. West Shore Park and Rec, we had a conversation about. And then we also talked about the affordable housing that's presently being built on Whale Road. And then finally, we had a discussion around post-secondary and how post-secondary can have a huge impact not only on our youth, but also on employment opportunities, and it can also be a clear economic driver. So the Premier and I were very much on the same wavelength the entire conversation, so it was a very, very positive. He messaged nothing but positive every time I brought up a subject line of what Colwood was looking for or needed or anything. He was very supportive of it. So I think he gets it, which is wonderful. Had an opportunity to go to the Association of Vancouver Island Coastal Communities, I believe it was last weekend or 2 weekends ago, in Powell River. I'm going to look to both my Councillor Day and Councillor Baxter in a moment to just have them give us a brief description of what they experienced. There was a couple motions that are going to UBCM that stood out. The one that I was most excited about was the motion to limit or look at allowing 16-year-olds to vote just from a municipal standpoint, and that passed. And so that is going to be moving on to UBCM. It doesn't mean anything from this point, but hopefully it does. And I will express to you this. If we truly believe in the democratic process, taking the opportunity to educate our youth while they're still in high school and giving them an opportunity to begin the experience of voting and understanding what that looks like is a great first step. I understand the pitfalls to it. I've heard the concerns around people making financial decisions if they're not paying property tax and along those lines. I understand that, but I believe that this is a good first step so that we get engaged citizens both provincially and federally as well. And I think this would be a wonderful step, and I certainly will be speaking in favor of it as it moves through to UBCM. Thank you. I won't take up all the stuff, so I'll go to Day and then Baxter.
Thanks. So I will hopefully be able to create a more cohesive report for you. I usually try to do that after I attend these events because I think it's really important and to pass that information on to our community. One of the areas that was very interesting to hear about was they were talking about a cultural shift towards embracing active transportation, and that there is going to be increased dedicated funding coming forward to do that. And traditionally, that's created a bit of a rural-urban split where those communities on the far north end of the island are shaking their fists at those of us who live in the more urban centers on the south end of the island. But that wasn't the case, and they are also looking at even opening up, I'm trying to remember the name of the act, but the Motor Vehicle Act, in order to look at how do we bring that about. And so in the face of climate change, that's some new tools that we have never had before. I also attended a presentation from Fisheries and Oceans Canada. We all very much value our oceans and the playgrounds that we have along the sides of them. And they've done an awful lot of work on their aquaculture, and they're providing a lot more tools to municipalities to be more engaged in that process. So that was both the federal and the provincial government who are involved in that.
I just want to touch on three topics. The first one is actually related to Chris's question earlier. I discovered in one of the discussion sessions that some other municipalities will have their new council do the strategic plan for 2020 to 2023, recognizing that it's not really possible for a brand new council to come up with a strategic plan in time for the budget process, which starts before they're elected. So in other jurisdictions, and I think it might be a good idea to adopt it here. This budget would have been done following the strategic plan arrived at by the previous council, and then the next 4 budgets, including the first budget for the following council, would be according to the strategic plan arrived at by this council. So that's something we might want to discuss in that session. Next item is that Colwood had one resolution there, and part of the reason I went, and I was the only new councillor that went, was to see how this process works. And it's really, the next level of democracy, if you like, in that it is all the coastal communities and I think all the island communities coming together to decide what they would like the province to do, and then that will be communicated to UBCM, which is all the municipalities coming together, where they will decide what they would like the province to do. So, it's democracy at work, gradually coming to a consensus province-wide. And Colwood puts forward, on behalf of other West Shore municipalities as well, with the support of them, a resolution that the province needs to put up its proper share of funding for RCMP members in areas that have RCMP policing. And I have to say that despite the fact that I gave a brilliant speech on this, I'm quite sure they were all going to vote for it anyway. And it was almost entirely unanimous, but I do thank the Mayor for efficiently providing me with all the information I needed to back that up. And then I can't claim to have talked to the Premier, but almost as good was on the way back from AVICC. You just never know when you're going to run into influential people when you go to these things. I stopped to charge my car, and there was Andrew Weaver charging his car. So I got to chat to Andrew Weaver about electric cars for a little while. Thank you.
In addition to AVICC, we have South Island Prosperity Project, which is basically an economic driver, which we are a member of. Councillor Kobayashi sits as our representative, and Councillor Kobayashi, you were going to give us a bit of an update.
Right. Well, there's some feedback of some sort here. Thank you very much, Mayor. So I just give you a quick recap. I promised I'd keep this to 5 minutes. But part of the South Island Prosperity Project, of which the City of Colwood is a member of, and it also involves a number, I think 10 member municipalities, as well as a number of private industry businesses that are members. They come up with this in 2017. They started with this index, and it was called the Prosperity Index. And I won't give you all the details here, but I will tell you just to take a look at the southislandprosperity.ca website, and all the data and the full report. You can read it there. It's under the menu item Projects and Prosperity Index. So I just thought, in a nutshell, I'd give you, I'd basically give you a recap of what was mentioned. It did appear, I noticed, in the Victoria Times Colonist over the weekend, but they downplayed a few things which I thought were kind of interesting. But basically, this index provides a snapshot of the region's current position relating to peer cities across Canada. So the cities in BC that are part of this are Surrey and Greater Victoria. So the data actually comes from the Victoria Census, and it's done every couple of years. So in essence, the benchmarks provide a context of which are needed to set priorities for the region. And basically, it's unlike traditional measurements. Like in Canada, we measure ourselves by GDP, gross domestic product. Well, this index looks at 5 different themes: economic resilience, transportation and mobility, housing and affordability, human health, and environmental health. So if you look at, there is a summary, executive summary report, which will let you capture it really quickly under that particular website, but the details behind it, exactly what these measurements mean, are also in the detailed report. But just quickly under economic resiliency, what it's found is that compared to the peer cities across Canada, and actually in the world, we have the lowest unemployment in Canada. I think we all know that. That's in the papers. We have a greater proportion of persons in full-time employment here in Greater Victoria compared to our peers in Canada. However, we have greater rates of person per capita living in poverty. Wow, that's not a stat to be proud of. Our debt ratio is trending the wrong way. And in fact, our debt ratio is probably the worst amongst all peer cities. And that's something they glossed over in the Times Colonist, I noticed. And we have the highest levels of income inequality. On transportation and mobility, believe it or not, I know everyone complains about the Colwood crawl or the sandage, whatever we call it now, snare. But our average commute time, in fact, along with our peer cities, we have the lowest in Canada, believe it or not. Bicycle paths, we certainly have a shortfall compared to our peer cities. Personal autos, we have the highest per capita, and we have a high capacity. We also are negative on high capacity public transport, because there's a lot of the peer cities that have they've got the mass transit, trains and things like that. We don't have that, so it wasn't apples and oranges. On housing and affordability, although we're providing additional rental housing supply, we're really increasing that supply. Right now, we're still lower than the rest of our peer cities. Availability and affordability of housing is really still negative, and that's what's causing our affordability issues here in Greater Victoria. And we have the highest homeless persons per capita. On the human health side, on the pluses, we have the greatest number of health professionals on a per capita basis. On the minus side, we have lots of that. There's been increases in homicide, violent crime, and suicide rates. In fact, the latter two rates here in Greater Victoria are well above our peer cities. And on the environmental health, we actually rank probably the highest of all the peer cities. Of the 9 indicators they had, in 6 of them were better than any other of our peer cities here in Canada. And the 3 that were just slightly lower. And the worst being, we have the reputation of being the largest water consumers, compared to our peer cities across Canada. So that's it in a nutshell, but it's really interesting reading, so I'd encourage you to look at that website report. You can download it, it's free, and it's really interesting reading. That's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kobayashi. The final thing I have to report back on is the mayors of Greater Victoria last week had a meeting with the Federal Minister of the Environment, and they presented to us a report that the federal government has written regarding changing climate. And so it was a lot of data. There's two points that that stood out for me, though, and basically it was this: within 25 years, if we do not change the way we are doing business from an environmental standpoint, the Greater Victoria area should anticipate an increase of temperature from 29 degrees on average. The hottest day in Victoria will move from 29 degrees to 31, which doesn't seem significant, But this next one stands out, and that is that we will move from presently having 8 days a year with temperatures over 25 degrees Celsius to 41 days. And what that means is, especially when you start looking at pest control and the environmental changes that will happen when you have over 30 days of plus 25 degrees Celsius weather, is significant. So that certainly was an eye-opener for me. I mean, obviously I did see some jokes off Twitter around that people are happy now they can give up their Vegas house and just stay here. But hopefully we get a hold of that and that we start being a little kinder to the environment. Moving on, 5, adoption and receipt of minutes. Can I please get a motion to adopt one set of minutes for the regular meeting of Council April 8th? Thank you. Moved by Councillor Kobayashi, second by Councillor Jensen. Errors, omissions, questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Can I please get a motion to receive a set of minutes for the Committee of the Whole meeting held on March 18th?
So moved.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Logan, second by Councillor Baxter. Any errors, omissions, questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Presentations. 6.1, CREST. You're up.
Thanks, Mayor Martin and Council, for having me here tonight. I've just got a short presentation to give you an overview of sort of what we've been up to, where we're hoping to go, and answer any questions you might have. So anytime people can jump in. So let's see, there we go. So this is what the CREST network looked like as we started our project 2 years ago. 10 sites. The one site in Colwood is at Triangle Mountain. Many of you probably are aware of that. And this is where we hope to finish up. This doesn't jump on me. At the end of the day. So we're adding considerable amount of new sites, particularly out here, because of the growth that's going on out in the Western community.
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you for a moment. And just
Sure.
for the benefit of people in the audience, could you maybe just explain really quickly CREST?
Sure. So CREST is a unified, comprehensive public safety network, and it's available to all emergency providers in the region. So when CREST started, I think Councillor Logan was part of the inaugural group. There were 36 agencies, all fire departments, all police agencies. There's 6 in the region, and a number of other folks. CFP Esquimalt, for example, police and fire, were all members and took part in that. And there are now 50 agencies that use the service, so it's been growing. I think the biggest, influence, on public safety is every user agency can talk to one another in real time across regions. Before CREST, I think there were 30-odd different networks. No one could communicate effectively, and that was highlighted by a number of events. High-speed robbery, snowstorm in 1996, and really sort of underlying problems with the communication system for public safety providers. So CREST fixed that, and in fairness, I think that CREST got off to a rocky start at the beginning. I think in the last 6, 7, or 8 years, really, the system has been stable, but like all technology, it becomes dated, and so the current system is almost 17 years old now, so it's time to replace it, and that's what we're doing. So you saw before the old system at 10 transmission sites, and we'll have about 32 or 33, depending if we're successful getting a site out in Shirley. So this hopefully shows, just sort of, graphically depicts in terms of where the infrastructure is located. Swear I didn't hit that. And so you can see we've got 6 sites in the Gulf Islands, and then a number in the downtown, and quite a few in the West Shore.
I'm just going to just a quick question. What's the difference between the red dots and the blue dots?
No, that's a good question. So we're getting a little bit into technology, but on the blue dots we're using 700 megahertz spectrum, which is a new public safety spectrum, particularly suited for urban settings, penetrates buildings better, smaller wavelengths, and in the outlying areas where the red dots is, we're continuing to use the VHF spectrum that we've been using on the current system. And the advantage to VHF is it travels a little bit further, so in terms of you don't need as much infrastructure to get there. So from a user standpoint, and like Councillor Jansen, he doesn't care whether he's using 700 or VHF, he just wants it to work. And so it is seamless to the user, so everything happens behind the scenes in the background. So hopefully that helps. Make sense? Okay. So right now we are live in the core, and we went live earlier this year, so all the core police services, UVIC security, and Victoria Bylaw are currently using the system. The next folks that will go on there are the core fire agencies, and then we will roll out into the Sandwich Peninsula. We're doing some testing on the system right now. We'll do that with agencies in the next 2 weeks, and then we will start to cut those folks over as well. After the peninsula is rolled out, then we'll move out here to the West Shore. So we're currently building some sites, and we have one more site that we haven't got the final approval on, but we're hoping to have that soon. So there's a number of sites that'll be new to the West Shore that will affect Colwood. Albert Head at a military site is being built as we speak. Bear Mountain will be another part of the infrastructure. View Royal Fire Hall, there's a new transmission site. You may have seen the pole as you drive back and forth to downtown. And you already have Triangle Mountain. So there's a number of new pieces of infrastructure that are fairly considerable, will make a big difference for your RCMP and your fire agencies. Some of the issues that we're seeing as CREST expands, I guess, and the area grows is in terms of sort of urban density. So this sort of depicts in terms of where we have transmission sites, and in terms of you have these radio shadowing effects as large buildings get built, and that's something that's happening in Colwood and Langford, and something that we have to be cognizant of. For example, I guess a cute little story is when we monitor all our networks, obviously, and we kept seeing one of our links starting to fail earlier last year in the downtown, and it would be very periodic, and we were scratching our heads for a day or two. It would just go up and down for a little bit. Everything's redundant, so this is just one link, so we have another link that supplied the data that we needed for the downtown. But it was a new bridge, and the new blue bridge is slightly taller than the old bridge, and so when it goes up, it blocks our microwave path between Esquimalt and downtown police. But the same thing with buildings, and so we're just cognizant that as density increases, and that does affect you folks out in the West Shore, that hopefully we can get involved in discussions whether we need some in-building treatment to make sure there's signal in some of these new dense buildings, or that we can get other transmission facilities in place so that we don't have those kind of blockages. And just to reinforce, really, we are really seeing that in the downtown and the West Shore in terms of you guys are growing rapidly, and we just need to be involved in the conversation with your development sort of side of things, so that we can plan and make sure that we can either get, as I say, more infrastructure in place on top of the building, or some in-building treatment in terms of to help make sure your first responders have adequate communications when they need it. So just really highlight and happy to answer any questions particular to Colwood or anything else.
Sure. I will go to Councillor Jensen, then Kobayashi.
Thank you, Mr. Horth. I had a thought while you were conducting your presentation there. Is there anything we can do as a city as we do grow as far as leveraging our building community to ensure that the structures they're building conform to whatever test requirements that you may have? For instance, and this is a direct safety issue for our RCMP members as well as our volunteer fire brigade. And the bottom line is, I think we have an obligation to ensure that their radios are able to transmit once they enter a brand new building. So is there a mechanism to test, or is there a way that we can help in the development process as far as insisting that a repeater or something be placed on the top of the building to meet public safety requirements?
That's a great question. So what we typically ask for from the development community that we work with in the municipality is that if there's a large building going up, just simply pick up the phone, send us an email saying we're in the starting a development permit process review or even a rezoning that is looking favorable, and it's going to be a building of this magnitude here, and we can do what we do called a coverage prediction. And so we look at the density of the building and the microwave paths that we currently have, And we can quickly determine that, yes, indeed, that's either going to cause us a blockage, physical blockage between two existing sites, or that we may have to look at an in-building repeater called a BDA, bidirectional amplifier, as a solution for first responders. And we can give advice to your development services folks fairly quickly. And then typically what happens, and it's been happening obviously more in Victoria and Saanich at this point, is they'll sit down with a developer, and as part of, I guess, the requirements, if you will, in terms of the development, i.e. you have to widen a road, you have to put in a bigger pipe for sewer or water, or you have to donate some parkland, you may have to have one of these solutions to make sure that first responders can get adequate communications. Typically, we find developers, once they're aware of the situation, recognize they want their tenants and occupants in the buildings to have first responder capabilities and do cooperate. Sometimes it's a bit of negotiation, but that's typically how it works.
Councillor Kobayashi, then Logan.
Thank you very much. So now I know CREST isn't some toothpaste I use. So thank you very much. I'm informed now. So I have two questions. My first question is, the equipment that you're using in this, is this like commercial off-the-shelf equipment that you're using, or are you developing your own equipment?
So we have a contract with Motorola. So Motorola provides the first responder equipment under contract. So we have a contract with Motorola for the equipment, the network that I showed you on an earlier slide. And also Motorola is one of the suppliers of the radios, the devices. We call them subscriber gear. It's either your portable on your hip or your mobile on your police vehicle or your fire truck or your ambulance. So we use Motorola equipment. It is geared for first responders. It's high-grade stuff.
It's effective then, would you say?
Yeah, I would say we went through a competitive bid process on the radios, but I would say arguably Motorola probably makes the best radios in North America.
So my second question is, I'm just surprised that you're still using line of sight antennas to do your communications. Why not using better technology like satellite technology right now? It's just because of all the blind spots and the effect of thermal inversions, et cetera. So it's kind of odd that for emergencies that you'd be using this line of sight equipment.
No, it's a great question. So we have redundancy in the system. So we use microwaves as a fairly standard process in terms of public safety throughout the world. And but we also have a network in terms of fiber. So and then radio to radio. So there's sort of three versions in terms of what we're able to provide. But yeah, the microwave link is really a standard in public safety. ECOM does the same thing over in Greater Vancouver, as do we. I would say the P25 network we're deploying is a world standard in terms of it is the standard for public safety across North America. Europe uses a bit of a different technology. They use typically a Tetra technology, which is a little bit older. I would say the P25 suite of standards is there's second to none. So.
Thank you, Councillor Logan.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to add to Mr. Horth's presentation and to the letter that I wrote to Council and the shareholders, part of the process with migrating to the P25 system was introducing some redundancy in the system and forming a partnership with ECOM. ECOM was transitioning to the P25 system as well, so we were able to piggyback on some of the pricing, which saved our members actually a significant amount of money in that transition. But what it also did was that should CREST go down for whatever reason due to an earthquake or whatever, ECOM could step in and provide the same service and vice versa. So we've got that backbone. CREST, while managing the transition to the P25 system, was also instrumental in working with Surrey Fire in the transition of the 5 fire departments and their dispatch to Surrey. So that was in the hopper all at the same time as trying to do the transition. And also, from a technology standpoint, the paging system that is being used by the composite and the volunteer fire departments is aging. And so we are in the process of replacing that as well, which is, it brings some challenges unto itself, but the paging system was old, and so we've been working with the area fire departments to transition. And finally, Your Worship, just for those that aren't aware of CREST, and although they make you smile, CREST, the nice thing about CREST is it's governed by a board of 20 that have a single share. Each shareholder or each board member has a single vote. So our vote in Colwood is just as valuable as a vote in Victoria and Saanich, which tends to make the discussion at the board level to the point and very, very even. And the other thing about CREST too is that it's owned by the municipalities or the shareholders. So we own a share, and Chosen owns a share, and Transit owns a share, and so it's not owned by a third entity. We are the owners of the organization, and I can tell you from a board perspective, that's top of mind. Although we operate as a corporation with a responsibility to the corporation, however, most of us are politicians around the table as well, and are sensitive to our local taxpayers. So I do want to say, as the board chair, that I'm very, very proud of our very small staff and the amount that they've undertaken in the last couple of years to roll this sucker out, and all the meanwhile trying to maintain the current 4.1 system at the same time.
Great. Thank you. Great info.
Maybe just to pick up a few points on Councillor Logan's perspective is we have a group of 7 technical people that maintain about 3,000 radios, and it's arguably, I think, the leanest technical group around, and they do a great job. And the other thing, I think, from a testimony in terms of how robust it is, I mean, most of you folks probably experienced some downtime in terms of the weather event we had just before Christmas, in terms of the hydro event, and we didn't go down. We stayed there, and that was the old system, so the new system is even more resilient. So it is well designed with lots of redundancy to take into account. I could go on quite a bit about that, but I think I'd get you guys nodding off before the meeting really commences. But I do appreciate you having me out here, and anytime you want any further information, happy to do that. So
Thank you for taking the time to come out and speak to us this evening.
All right.
Moving on, we have 2 correspondents this evening. The first is from the City of Maple Ridge, is requesting a resolution to be passed and forwarded to Premier Horgan and the Union of British Columbia Municipalities regarding the importance of local government autonomy. The specifics of the request are included in the letter. What's the will of council?
Motion to receive, Your Worship.
Moved by Councillor Logan.
Second.
Second by Councillor Parkinson. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. We have a second letter, which I mentioned in my remarks, my mayor's remarks. This was from MLA John Horgan for Langford 1 to Fuca. Sent us a letter on March 29th to the Minister of Public Safety and Solicitor General, showing his support for the need for provincial funding for more RCMP officers in the West Shore. Can I get a motion to receive? Thank you. Moved by Councillor Kobayashi, seconded by Councillor Jensen. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. New business. Annually, the city must prepare audited financial statements for council's acceptance. The city has appointed MNP LLP as the city's auditors. Corey, I'm not going to lunch. Corey, help me with your last name. Vanderhorst?
Vanderhorst, yes.
Oh, look at that. I nailed it. Is MMP's regional assurance partner and is here to present the audited finding report. Following the audited findings report, the city manager of finance will lead a financial statement highlight discussion and development cost charge report. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, councillors. Thank you for inviting me here today, and thank you for the introduction. So I'm going to take you through a little bit about our audit, what we do. I won't get into the nitty-gritty details, as Mr. Horth said, it might bore you and put you to sleep. And then I always like to end on a little bit of financial analysis, kind of looking at trends of the last 5 years, what are we seeing in the finances with respect to debt levels, taxation, things like that. And then I will turn it over to staff for some of their reports after. But I'll hang around if there's any other questions. And please, as I'm going through my presentation, feel free to stop me and ask questions as we go. There we go, get technology working. The topics, as I mentioned, I'll talk about our report here, some key findings. I will confirm that MMP, as an accounting and audit firm, is independent of the city. We didn't do any other projects or any other work this year that would impair our objectivity. And as I mentioned, I'll end on financial analysis. So starting with the fun audit stuff, what do we do when we come in to look at your numbers and your finances? First, we get an understanding of the controls in place that allow your staff to create accurate financial information. What we do is we look at the design of those controls and the implementation. We no longer test the effectiveness of those controls. It's just not deemed to be an efficient audit process, but we look at those controls, and if there's anything that's a serious concern, we bring it to staff's attention around risk management, safeguarding of assets, things like that. Then we sample transactions throughout the year. And we can't look at everything. We would be here all year, and it would be very cost ineffective. So we don't look at every transaction when we form our opinion. Our audit is complete. Happy to say that we are writing what we call an unqualified audit opinion, so that is a clean audit opinion again this year. The materiality that we used in our audit was $900,000, so that is calculated as a percentage of your gross revenue for the year. And what we do with that number is we test every transaction over $900,000, and we sample underneath. Sorry, there's a question from Councilor Parkinson. Okay, great. And again, if there's something that we find in the course of our audit that's $1 million, $1.2 million that isn't accurate in the financials, I can't give you that clean audit opinion. So I need all the items and things that are floating around that we find to be below that number for me to be able to give you a clean audit opinion. So during the audit, we talk with Jen, the Manager of Finance, Director of Finance, and really staff in many of the other departments, because we are really trying to get that big picture. There are lots of other things going on, not just in the finance department here at the city. But I'd like to thank staff for all their assistance. There are no changes from the audit service plan that was previously communicated to Council in the fall. I'm happy to report there are no significant unadjusted differences. So this is, as I mentioned, if we find an error or an item that needs adjustment, we talk about it with staff. There isn't anything for us to bring to your attention this year. So again, an unqualified audit opinion. In this statement, you also get a letter from us confirming our independence as of today's date. So our independence letter covers from January 1st, 2018, the start of the fiscal year, all the way to today's date that we didn't do any other projects. And then I'll wrap up with a little bit of financial analysis. So we like to look at 3 areas. We like to look at sustainability, vulnerability, and flexibility, and I'll get into each of those as I go through. So the first one is sustainability, is the degree to which the city can maintain its existing liabilities or its existing obligations without increasing debt or tax on the local economy. So here we're really looking at your assets and your liabilities and how much is there. So when we look at your total assets compared to your liabilities, we want to see this ratio greater than 1. So it's consistently above 5.9 for the last 5 years, so more assets than debt. But the really important one that we want to focus in on is what we call this financial assets to liabilities ratio. So this means if this ratio is below 1, it means you have to generate revenue in the future to pay for the past, to pay for past activities, past capital projects, things like that. When you get to that position of being above 1, it means there is money set aside for future projects. So the financial assets to liabilities ratio has been steadily improving for the last 5 years. It is now above 1. It's 1.2%, 1.2, shouldn't have a percent there. It's a ratio. But that is a positive result over the last 5 years of getting to a positive financial assets ratio. Oh, I think I killed it. There we go. The next area is flexibility, so that the degree that the city might be able to change debt or tax burden to meet your financial obligations. And here we look at your interest charges. What is the cost on debt that you've borrowed in the past that's being incurred and you're having to generate revenue either through taxes or other means to pay for it. So when we look at the ratio of interest costs compared to your total revenue, you get this number somewhere between 2 and 3%, which has been steady for the last few years. In 2018, that ratio is 2.27. So what that tells us is a low amount of debt that you're servicing on an annual basis. And the next area that we look at is the physical assets, so what we call the tangible capital assets. It's buildings, roads, water, sewer, infrastructure, vehicles, anything that you can touch. So we look at the carrying value or the depreciated value of those assets and compare it to the original cost. What did it cost originally? What's the value now? It's around 72% for 2018. It's been just slowly marching downwards from about 79% in 2009. So what this tells us is aging assets, which I don't think is a new a new thing, but aging assets, and we're starting to see the cost of construction climb rapidly. Residential cost of construction is 6 to 7% increase annually. My understanding is that municipal construction is higher than that. So around 72%. There's some significant aged assets. If you broke it down to the different categories, you would see different ratios there of what assets are older. And the last area we look at is vulnerability. So the degree that the city is vulnerable to federal and provincial funding. So this one often fluctuates a lot. For the last few years, the ratios have been consistently around 6%. In 2018, it dropped to 4.9. What we see with this ratio is it tends to spike when you have large capital projects that get federal infrastructure money, but there hasn't been anything major in the last few years, so you're in that low 5 to 6% range. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me, and I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thanks. Just one quick question, which is when you look at our whole picture and come up with these, evaluations of our flexibility and sustainability, are you taking into account our consolidated position or just the cities?
Consolidated. Thank you. It's an excellent position. It does include a portion of the Westboro Parks and Recreation Society, which would specifically impact that capital asset ratio, as well as the assets to liabilities.
Just one quick follow-up. And what about the CRD? That's not taken into account, so our sewer monolith isn't in there.
Nope.
Okay, thank you.
Not on your book.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question. So these numbers, I'm trying to put them in context right now, and so I'm having troubles reconciling this in my own head. So are they good, bad, indifferent? So they're numbers, and for us sitting around the table, it depends on what industry you're in. You look at the different ratios, right? So how does our city compare, say, to a city of similar size and revenues? Thank you.
Thank you. Good question, Councillor. I think the big takeaway when I look at these numbers and when we do this analysis is to look at the trend and what's been going on for the last few years. A lot of communities are very different in terms of the infrastructure you've got, what you're managing, right? Not having water here and a few of those things that are being handled by other communities. But the trends, there's a lot of stable numbers in there. The government transfers and other government funding is fairly stable. The debt interest is fairly stable. But the trends to look forward to are the decreasing ones, being the physical assets and the age of the assets increasing. However, if you look then at what staff has done for the last few years to improve the financial assets to liabilities, that's a positive thing. To get to that position of you're not generating tax revenue you pay for something 2 years ago. You're now in a position to move forward. But I would always encourage council and staff to consider the age of the assets. The infrastructure deficit issue is not going to go away. And that is something that, most of the communities, to give you some context, the communities that I work with are sitting somewhere in the 50 to 80% range. So at that 72, I think you're not on the low end, but it's continuing to go down.
If there's no other questions, then what I will need is that council, I need a motion that council receive the draft audit findings for information purposes only. Moved by Councillor Kobayashi, second by Councillor Logan. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Which moves us on to 8.2, which is the 2018 Annual Development Cost Charge Report. Who's doing this?
That would be me.
All right, our deputy.
Item 8.3 is our financial statement highlights. So I don't know if we want to jump into that next, or I'm happy to do the DCC report.
So is 8.3 easier if we do 8.3 and then come back to 8.2?
8.3 is likely a lengthier presentation. It's the highlights of the annual financial statements.
So if you're suggesting to do 8.3 first, I think council will take that as advice, and we'll do 8.3 first.
Just in the
unless
essence of
somebody objects. Nobody objects. So yeah. So let's jump right to that.
Thank you. Okay, so we have before you our draft consolidated financial statements. We are looking for a council resolution tonight to approve these statements as amended. You should have each had 2 revised statements before you. There was a minor correction made this afternoon to those 2 statements. So we are looking for approval of these statements tonight and authorization for our finance director and our CAO to sign the statements. And what we've prepared for you is hopefully a brief presentation of the highlights of the statements. So I don't intend to go through every page, but please stop me at any time. Happy to answer any questions. So as mentioned, our statements are presented on a consolidated basis. So it's 100% of our operations and capital activity, and then it's also our proportionate share, our ownership of the West Shore Parks and Recreation Society, and our percentage is just over 22%. So 22% of West Shore's results are consolidated with ours, and those numbers are before you in the draft statements. So we'll start with a review of our financial position. This is Statement A. So as Corey mentioned, our sustainability continues to improve. And specifically what we mean by that is the rate at which our financial assets exceed our total liabilities. It was only a few years ago that we were in a net debt position. Our liabilities, in particular our debt, exceeded our assets. So this year we've seen a $5 million increase in our net financial asset position. So just start at the top of the statement here, the financial assets. So this represents the city's cash, investments, and accounts receivable. And we've seen a $6 million increase in this balance, and this is directly related to cash generated by operations, which we have then invested. Our total financial liabilities, so liabilities include amounts that we refer to as deferred revenue, but probably a more useful way to think of that balance is it's restricted funding that we receive, so gas tax funding that is set aside and we then draw down on as we spend it. It's also development cost charges that we collect from developments, and we set those monies aside until we're ready to spend them on eligible projects, as well our debt or any equipment loans. That's included in that $31 million balance there. Overall, that balance increased by $1 million, directly result of cash that the city received for development cost charges, as well as deposits that's then being offset by repayment of debt this year. We retired approximately $1.2 million in debt. And moving down, the tangible capital assets, this is the city's infrastructure. So road infrastructure, parkland, sewer infrastructure, drainage infrastructure. And overall, you're seeing the net book value, and the net book value is the cost of that infrastructure reduced by the amortization. So we will expense everything over its estimated useful life. And overall, that figure has decreased by about $300,000 from last year. That's a result of, we had an addition of just over $3 million in assets, But then we have had disposals. We had 2 land sales this year, and then we also incurred $2.6 million in amortization expense that reduced the value of the city's infrastructure. The other assets that are listed there, just shy of $1 million, that's primarily the city's gravel inventory that is used by our Public Works Department, and a minor portion of that are prepaid expenses. So, for example, insurance, we'll prepay that for the next year. So in sum, when you look at our financial position this year over last year, our accumulated surplus has increased by just shy of $4.8 million. And so that surplus there, how have we allocated that $4.7 million? Well, $3.2 million of it went into our reserve funds, and I'll provide a little bit more detail about the reserve activity in a moment. About $570,000 increased our operating surplus, so that is another funding source for the city. And then we saw a net increase of our investment in the city's infrastructure of $1 million. So that's how that $4.7 million surplus was allocated. We'll now move over to get an understanding of what drove the $4.7 million surplus. So annually, the city must set a budget. And overall, per legislation, we cannot budget for a surplus. But here we are talking about the surplus that we've generated. Well, this surplus here, for accounting purposes, we're referring to the extent by which your revenues exceed your expenses. And we do require, Colwood requires that revenue exceed expenses to finance our debt repayments. So we levy parcel tax levies that then fund the debt retirement. We also levy to fund transfers to our reserves. So that was a big topic this year with our financial plan process, was sustainable infrastructure and how we are going to generate sufficient funding. So what I will go through now in more detail is a comparative of the budget that we set for 2018 and what actually happened. Because as you can see, we were anticipating an annual surplus of just over $400,000, and it came in at $4.7 million. And one of the primary drivers of that is related to infrastructure that is a result of development in the city. So our budget does not contemplate the physical, tangible assets that we receive. It just contemplates developer contributions of cash. So as that infrastructure comes online, sidewalks or roads, or if there's contributions of parkland, for example, that's not contemplated on the budget. So now go through, and I'll just highlight some of the variances of our revenue. So revenues overall came in $2.6 million, or 11% over budget, and this is primarily a result of $2.7 million in infrastructure that the city received as a result of development this year. And that $2.7 million primarily represents parkland dedication that occurred, as well as a lot that was contributed to the city in the Royal Bay area, and then the remaining balance, again, was all subdivision assets. So some sewer infrastructure, some drainage infrastructure, and some road works. So if we start at the top, so, you know, our primary revenue source is that of taxation. We typically see little fluctuation between our budget and what we actually realize. And when there is a variance, this year it was in part that we realized a little bit more federal PILT revenue than we had budgeted. We typically budget conservatively, and that was offset by the impact of any BC assessment supplementary cycles So we set our taxation budget based on the revised roll we have at the beginning of the year, and then throughout the year, if there are successful appeals on the assessed values of properties, that may impact the taxation the city realizes. So moving down to the user fees, you can see that we came in approximately 3.5% or $127,000 under budget. This is primarily related to the timing impact of development in the city. So our building permit revenues came in under budget, but we actually saw a substantial increase in the amount of permit revenues that we've deferred, and that's because we collect all of the permit revenues at inception, and then we recognize that revenue typically over the term of the build, say 6 to 12 months. And we saw quite a spike in collection related to two significant developments at the end of the year. So that revenue will be realized in 2019. That swing there is more of a timing. Then moving down, we saw a significant increase in our investment income over budget, which we did highlight during this year's budget deliberations as well. And this in part is just due to 2018. We really saw a more active approach to our investment strategy in accordance with the city's investment policy. And those earnings are helping to drive our transfers to reserves, in part related to efforts for the sustainable infrastructure financing. Then moving down, and we have our conditional and our unconditional government transfers. So this is grant money that the city receives. So the unconditional, we actually realized about $30,000 more than we were anticipating, and this is related to increased activity for the casino. So the casino did see some major renovations last year, and we're starting to realize a little bit more revenue under our sharing agreement there. The conditional government transfers, this is where we often see a bigger swing between what we budget and what we realize. As the city anticipates doing capital projects, we budget to fund those projects. In 2018, it was primarily a budget of gas tax funding, and a number of those projects were not completed and were deferred to 2019, so we will recognize the funding as the expenditures are incurred. Moving down to the developer contributions, that's the largest variance here, and again, as I've mentioned, it's directly related to the contributions of infrastructure related to development. And the other line item that you see there, that primarily represents the gain that we realized this year on the disposal of two pieces of land. If there's no questions on the revenue, I'll move over to the expenses. Okay, so overall,
Sorry, Jen, I've got a quick question through the chair. The developers' contributions, are there restrictions on what that can be used for?
yes, so the developer contributions, in a sense, it's twofold. One, we receive cash contributions, so typically it's contributions to our affordable housing and our amenities reserve fund, which are subject to the restrictions of that reserve. And then we also realize contributions of infrastructure, which PSAB accounting standards require us to recognize that revenue, although it's not cash, it's infrastructure. So it flows through our operations statement, and then it increases our infrastructure balance, or our TCA. And as we get down into the composition of our accumulated surplus, you'll see almost 90% of our accumulated surplus is the city's infrastructure. No problem. So with expenses, this year we did come in under budget by 7%, or approximately $1.6 million. The primary driver of this was the RCMP contract coming in under budget. That contract came in under budget by approximately $500,000. That amount has been set aside in the city's reserve. As well, we've had a number of staffing vacancies. So starting with general government, this function represents corporate services, finance, human resources, and our IT department. We had a number of positions that were vacant and filled mid-year, and we also generated a surplus, the IT department's vacancy in particular, and you'll see later in the presentation that surplus has been set aside in our reserve. As well, with engineering and transportation, that budget came in almost 10% actuals came in almost 10% under budget. Primary driver of that is coming in under budget on our major road repairs and crosswalk budget, again, as well as some salaries budgets. And then the planning and development, the primary driver there for coming in 15% under budget was related to a number of special projects that were either not pursued or were deferred to 2019. So when we look at that $1.6 million savings, in a sense, about $500,000 has been put aside into the RCMP reserve fund. Once we receive the final numbers for their fiscal year, which just completed on March 31st, we'll do a final analysis, and per council's resolution from, I think it was last fall, we'll transfer that funding over to the police building reserve fund. We do have a resolution for that, but right now it's just sitting in the RCMP surplus reserve fund. Another just shy of $600,000 increased our general operating accumulated surplus as a result of this. And also, in total, we had over $300,000 in special projects that were not funded by way of current year revenues, so it didn't impact our current year surplus.
Just before you move on.
Yeah.
Can I just clarify, please, under engineering and transportation, there's $469,000 that was not spent. What I heard from you was the majority of that money that was not spent was because we did not accomplish projects that we wanted to accomplish, for example, crosswalks and other projects. Is that correct, or am I mishearing what you're saying?
Slightly mishearing. So with the engineering and transportation line item, there was a few factors. So our materials and supplies budget came in about $225,000 under budget. That was related to budgets that we had established for major road repairs and crosswalks. In addition to that, we've also improved the costing. So within the engineering and transportation, that's the bulk of the public works budget. Historically, that budget has seen consolidation of, for example, insurance budgets and that sort of thing. Those are being better costed out between transportation, solid waste, and parks. So that, in part, explains the variance. And then the special projects budget for engineering was approximately $90,000 under budget.
So I guess my point in the question was it's not really a cost savings if we didn't get things that this council asked for projects to be completed and they just weren't completed. We've lost out because we didn't get that crosswalk that we hoped to get or those things. Is that not correct? Is that not really what I'm hearing tonight?
May I, Mr. Chair? That's correct. You may recall from the budget deliberations this year, as a result of the major roads budget being historically underspent, we made the choice to transfer that to the capital core budget. And so now what essentially happens is there's basically $200,000 of major roads that is funded by taxation each and every year. If that work doesn't get done in the year, that will get that will be transferred to the infrastructure reserve, so it's not lost, essentially. So we can accumulate funds. And let's suppose engineering decides it's most cost effective to go do $1 million of work in year 5 as opposed to 200 every single year. Now they have that choice. So previous to this budget year, the major roads budget was historically underspent and would essentially end up in our accumulated surplus and therefore not be dedicated for that infrastructure. So Council made the conscious choice of dedicating that taxation funding in this financial plan.
What I'm seeing and hearing here is that of the $470,000 underspend, about 90,000 was capital and the rest was operations?
No, 90,000 was one-time special operating project underspent, and the rest was core operations underspent.
Okay, so it's either overlay or other operations, overlay being classified as capital. Yeah.
Yes, this analysis before you right here is no comment on the capital expenditures. It's on the operating expenses of the city, which include both the core, so existing service level expenses, as well as the one-time special project.
Thank you.
So in summary, the impact of the revenues of $26.1 million and total actual expenses of the $21.4 million, the city realized an annual surplus of just over $4.7 million. So adding that to our accumulated surplus, we now have an accumulated surplus balance of just shy of $154 million. We'll now take a moment just to go into the composition of that accumulated surplus. So where does it sit? Because it's not all cash in the bank. So, as I'd mentioned, the majority of our surplus is invested in the city's infrastructure. So the roads, the parkland, the land under the roads, etc. So just shy of 90%. We then have just over $12.6 million set aside in our reserve funds. And I will go into the reserve fund activity in more detail because that is an area that Council has really been making conscious efforts to increase the balances. And a lot of that has been budgeted to increase the reserve balance to what we're seeing today. We then have our operating fund accumulated surplus. So that is where the impact of cash generated, basically our cash net income, so where revenues exceed expenses, that accumulates there, and that is another funding source for the city. And lastly, we have a portion of our accumulated surplus that's identified as West Shore Parks and Recreation Society. So every year, because we are a member owner in the society, as our percentage or our portion of ownership fluctuates, so whether a member owner comes off, which is what happened in 2018, the Wanda Fuca electoral district had a minor ownership piece, they are no longer a member owner, then our piece of the pie increases. We must recognize a gain for accounting purposes. The accumulated impact of every gain and loss that we must recognize each year is stated on that line there. And so I've commented on the amount invested in our infrastructure. So then moving into the reserve activity, and that is quite difficult to see, but it also is in the package before you. So the 2018 budget, we did budget to transfer $2.1 million into our reserves, and actual operations saw us transfer $4.2 million over. So in addition to what we intended to transfer, primarily amounts funded via taxation to start to work towards our sustainable infrastructure plan. We also realized a gain on two separate land sales this year of just shy of $1.5 million, which was transferred into our capital reserve fund. Council also had a resolution that any IT operating surplus be set aside into our equipment reserve fund, and we realized a surplus of just shy of $120,000. And then the RCMP policing contract surplus is currently sitting in the RCMP reserve, and when we do our final analysis, we'll transfer that over to the police building reserve per council resolution. The 2018 budget anticipated that we would be drawing down on our reserves to the extent of $2.4 million. The actual drawdown was just over $1.1 million. That's primarily related to the deferral of the purchase of the new fire engine to 2019. So that $1 million budget, we'll see that drawdown happen in 2019. And in my time here, that is the first time that we have funded fire fleet purchase by way of our reserves and not incurred a loan, incurred debt to finance that. So overall, that is what brings us from an opening reserve balance of just shy of $9.5 million to $12.6 million.
I think I could comment on DCCs here.
Yeah.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I just also wanted to identify the difference, in case anyone notices, between what we call reserves in accounting standards and what I might call reserves during the budgeting process. We also have pockets of money, DCCs that you're aware of, over $5 million, gas tax, $3 million, I believe, and cash in lieu. They're not considered reserves by accounting standards, so they're not included here, but they certainly are funding sources that can be considered in the budget process. They just have greater restrictions. So overall, our funding options, let's say, are over $20 million.
So sorry, does that conclude your report, or are you still moving, or?
Just about.
Okay.
So the next piece of our accumulated surplus is that of our operating fund surplus. And this does represent another funding source for the city. So the majority of the just shy of $6 million balance there, that's our general operating fund surplus. We do have about $500,000 accumulation of our sewer operation. And we refer to it as a net operating fund surplus on the statements because we have made an internal borrowing to finance debt repayments related to one of our sewer local service areas before we started taxing for that area. So that in 2018, we initiated parcel taxation, and you will see that internal borrowing decrease over the remaining term of the debt for that area. And, sorry, click happy. The last slide here, what we wanted to highlight for you is that there is cash to support our surplus balance. And so this slide here really shows, okay, we've got just shy of $37 million in cash and investments, about $11.5 million. That's cash that's set aside as one of the funding sources that our director just mentioned, so DCCs, gas tax revenues. We also have just over $3 million in refundable deposits, primarily related to development activity. We do anticipate that those deposits will be repaid. And then we have payables on the books as of the end of the year of $3.6 million. A large portion of that payable is property. Federal PILT payments that we receive on behalf of other jurisdictions, we hang on to that cash until the last moment, and then we pass it over to those jurisdictions. And then when you remove the amount allocated to our reserve funds, we're left with just over $5.5 million. And that more or less represents our operating surplus. That really concludes the highlights of the 2018 draft statements, and happy to answer any questions.
Looking to council for questions, and then I do have a motion to move. Councillor Kobayashi.
Yeah, through the chair. Whoops. Through the chair. Just a quick question. I know it's capital for the sewage treatment. That's a capital expense, I would assume. And so, you know, with all these overages they've been announcing in the paper, like the 10 million, and we assume about just less than 5% of that, that's on our hook. Do we reserve for that, or do you project like a 15% overage? How is that paid for? Do we get new loans? Is it operational money? I have a lot of questions on that, obviously. Thanks.
Yeah, so if we have a look at the property taxation note, it shows the breakdown. It is on page... Note 14. Sorry, it's note 14. It's page 19 of the financial statements there. And so that shows a breakdown in our taxation revenue. So the CRD amounts requisitioned for initiatives such as the sewage treatment, ultimately that's not on the face of our financial statements, but this note provides the detail over amounts that are collected on behalf of other jurisdictions. So to answer your question, no, funding is not set aside. Annually, as the CRD requisitions us, we then levy that amount as part of the CRD mill rate. We collect that and we then remit it onto the CRD. So that revenue does not form part of the city's property taxation revenue.
Unless there's any other questions, I will need a motion that basically states that Council approves the 2018 consolidated financial statements and that the Chief Administration Officer and the Director of Finance be authorized to sign the 2018 consolidated financial statements. Thank you. Moved by Councillor Logan, second by Councillor Kobayashi. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. To our Deputy Director, are we going back to 8.2 then?
Yes, please.
Okay.
So item 8.2 before you, this is our annual development cost charges report. So legislation requires that we bring forward this information for council annually. So as mentioned, the city at year end had a deferred or restricted revenue balance of $11.5 million. Included within that amount is just over $5 million in development cost charges. And that's what the report before you highlights is the DCC activity for the 2018 year. So we had no intentions of spending our DCC funding in 2018. The roads DCC bylaw is currently under review, and staff do anticipate bringing that forward to council later this spring, and that will include a list of eligible projects that we may use this funding for. So 2018 saw the collection of just over $1.5 million in DCC funding, and as well annually we allocate interest revenue that's earned on those funds. So at the end of the year, we had just over $4.4 million in our road DCC and just shy of $700,000 in our sewer DCC. And we're just looking for council to receive this report for information purposes only.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Logan, second by Councillor Day. Any discussion?
What are sewer DCCs used for?
That's an excellent question. So sewer DCCs are primarily intended to help fund with the enhancement of the city's sewer system.
So I thought that all the sewers were paid for under local areas, services and stuff like that.
The city sees very little activity in terms of collection on the sewer DCCs, primarily because any existing local area service, so any development within an existing local area service, is exempt from paying DCCs.
Two seconds.
I just want to help with that.
Okay, do you have a follow-up before I go to Councillor Baxter? No, I can come
Still,
back to you.
still confused, but
Okay, Councillor
not
Baxter.
surprisingly.
I just wanted to help Councillor Parkinson with that. The enhancement refers to increasing the size of sewers, basically. So all of those people who are not already in areas where they paid for sewers, who add themselves to the system, are taking up volume in the pipe that may mean that when those who are already in sewer areas develop, that there will be a shortage of volume in the pipe. So this DCC is calculated to pay for that increase in volume when it's needed, which, as you know, is quite some time away. That's an oversimplification of the situation, but it's close.
So how then does that tie into when we talked about a few weeks ago a sustainable sewer infrastructure fund to replace sewers?
But that's to replace worn-out sewer infrastructure. There's a difference between under volume and worn out.
Perhaps.
All right, we have a motion on the table. I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Moving on to 8.4, 3221 Heather Bell Pacific Landing Sub-Area Boundary Amendment, CD 15 Zone. The applicant has submitted information that indicates the location of Bee Creek as shown on the CD 15 zone map is incorrect according to the boundaries between sub-areas 4 and 6. Should be amended. The planner, Dennis Carlson, is here for staff if they have any questions. What I'm looking for is a motion that staff be directed to prepare the appropriate land use bylaw amendment to the CD 15 zone in accordance with the zone map attached to the staff report dated April 8th.
So move.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Parkinson, seconded by Councillor Logan. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Thanks for coming out, Dennis, for sitting. We'll see if we can do that with the other staff as well. Moving on to 8.5, clarification of impact of federal legislation at Esquimalt Lagoon Migratory Bird Sanctuary. At the Committee of the Whole meeting held on April 15th, the committee discussed a proposed amendment to the animal control bylaw and requests that staff provide additional information regarding jurisdictional issues in the area. There is a council recommendation that the Animal Control Bylaw number 1533, 2014 be amended to require all dogs be on leash between the south end boundary of the bird sanctuary and the municipal boundary, and that the city coordinate with the Canadian Wildlife Services for the development and installation of interpretive and regulatory signs on the Esquimalt Lagoon. Thank you. Moved by Councillor Baxter. Second by Councillor Day. Discussion? Councillor Logan.
Thank you, Worship. I will not be supporting the change. I understand the sentiment behind the intention, but as we heard at last week's Committee of the Whole meeting, there will be an enforcement challenge, and personally, it hasn't been a subject that people have lit their hair on fire over since I've been on council, present company included. And so, you know, I'm just, I'm sorry, well, I'm just drawn. And so if it's, I take the attitude if it's not broke, you know, we don't need to fix it. And I walk the lagoon a fair amount with my dog. Haven't encountered the issues that have been described from time to time, like last week. So I just don't see us supporting something that we're going to have a hard time enforcing. And I don't think it's an issue.
Anyone else? Councillor Kobayashi, then Dave.
As said at Committee of the Whole, I will not be supporting this either because although I think it's great to do this, but if we can't enforce it, then why have it? And that's my bottom line.
Councillor Day?
Thank you. I will be supporting it. It has been an issue that we dealt with at when we used to have the Parks Committee, and we had presentations from CRD Animal Control there. It certainly was a big issue at the beach with other dog owners, not as much with the birds themselves, but the dog-on-dog interactions have been difficult, and I think this goes a long way to making it both safe for the migratory birds and safer for people to have a place where they know what's going to be expected of them. And in terms of enforcement, I think CRD can certainly work with us on that.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter.
I just want to address specifically the issue of enforcement. There is already a restricted area there, and what this does is makes it bigger. Now, you could argue that that's going to take more enforcement, but since the entire area is visible to anybody standing on the road, I don't think it takes a lot of extra enforcement. What it does do is make it very much simpler to understand what's in and what's out. And I also understand that we have added a bioenforcement officer, bringing us up from 1 to 2. So I think we have a better chance of enforcing if needed with that in place.
Thank you. Just before I go on to Councillor Parkinson, I'm just going to look to staff because I'd like some clarification from staff. If this motion was to pass, this is about people having dogs on leashes at Esquimalt Lagoon. That is not a city bylaw officer issue. That's an animal control CRD issue. Is that not correct? Okay. Thank you. Well, it can be, yeah. They can do anything. Who is Councillor Parkinson?
I also am not going to support this motion for a number of reasons. And there could be more enforcement down there. There could be enforcement of the existing rules that would probably go a long way to a lot of the issues. It's also, we talk here about the sand and the lack of sand, and really the beach is much more walkable in that area than it is as you get further south, where our dogs off leash are currently welcomed, if we want to say that. I guess I just wasn't convinced that this was a burning issue, and that the approach shouldn't be more of a step-by-step where we do more of enforcing what we really know, the dogs on the lagoon side, the dogs that do chase birds, and then and the dogs, if there are dogs that are aggressive, which there are, and frankly, I've been hearing stories of CRD not being very helpful in those cases. There's lots of things we could do to tighten up enforcement before we just blanketly ban people. So,
thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor?
Your Worship, I wonder, if you could indulge me, there's two portions of that motion.
Okay.
One's the animal control bylaw issue. The other is coordinating with the Wildlife Service for development.
Would you like
and
to separate?
I think so.
Sure.
Please.
Okay, thank you. I have a mover and seconder. Do we need to vote on severing it, or can I just take that as direction? Or can I choose to just do that? Okay, so I'm not going to call a vote because we can just sever it. So we're going to go to the first one. I'll read it out one last time so that people hear it. that the animal control bylaw number 1533, 2014 be amended to require all dogs be on leash between the southeast boundary of the bird sanctuary and the municipal boundary. That is the question we are voting on. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3. Those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4. So Councillor Parkinson, Logan, Jensen, and Kobayashi oppose. Going to the second motion, and I'll read that out, and that the city coordinate with Canadian Wildlife Services for the development and installation of interpretive and regulatory signs at the Esquimalt Lagoon. Discussion, I'm going to have Councillor Day first.
Sure. Just wanted to quickly motivate for this because when you know more about what's down there, you generally care more about it. And working with the Canadian Wildlife Service would allow us to create some interpretive signage that I think would be beneficial all around.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those opposed, or excuse me, all those favor? Not opposed. Yeah, it was a trick question. I thought I'd get you all. That one carried. 8.6 is needing to be taken off the table because there is in-camera information that we were hoping to get to before this meeting began, which is legal advice, and so we are going to have to postpone 8.6 until the next council meeting. Moving on, and can I just do that, or how do I do that? Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, so council, this is the choice. We have two choices here. We could postpone 8.6 until we could go in camera at the end of this meeting, hear the legal advice, come out of in camera, come back to public, and answer the question, or we can wait till the next council meeting. By going back to public, it means however long we stay in camera, public's going to be waiting in the hall until we're resolved. So, which...
I propose that we postpone it to a future meeting, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. So, just looking at a corporate officer, do I need an actual motion? Do we need to vote on this? Yes, the motion that we defer to a future. Okay, thank you.
Seconded.
Motion to defer.
Moved by Councillor Jensen, seconded by Councillor Baxter. Any discussion? Councillor Parkinson?
Should we poll the public to see if there's any here to, they might rather wait an hour rather than come back 2 weeks from now. I don't know if there's any public here with one input on this.
Yeah. No, I'm concerned about in camera that we could be long in camera, so I'm not even going to poll. You guys are going to come back to discuss cannabis. I'm sorry. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Moving on to 8.7, review of the liquor retail store land use regulation. The Director of Long Range Planning and Sustainability has provided a report on regulations covering liquor retail sales in Colwood and a proposal to institute a separate rule between liquor stores and grocery stores that sell liquor and/or wine. And basically the recommendation coming out is that the staff report titled Review of Liquor Retail Store Land Use Regulations dated April 15th be received and no further action taken. I'm looking to our director. Do you have anything to add? No? Okay. So what's the will of council? Does the council have questions? Because we do have staff here. Councillor Baxter?
In the report, I recall reading there was a list of other municipalities that have placed restrictions on how far apart they can be. And but there was no indication of how many haven't.
Right.
So it appears that it's a minority that have. I'd like to know if that's the case.
Sure. We'll look to our Director of Long-Term Sustainability. And
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We didn't actually take an analysis of all the municipalities in the province, but I'd hazard a guess that the majority have restrictions within zones akin to Langford. So there's separation within zones with respect to where liquor stores can go. Other municipalities have guidelines with respect to where liquor stores can be located. But the type of separation that's been called for specifically targets sales within grocery stores, because the provincial legislation and regulations do not require a 1 kilometer separation between liquor stores and wine on shelf grocery sales. There has been a handful of municipalities that have specifically taken action to separate those uses, and they're mentioned in one of the submissions from the proponents. Most nearby is View Royal. They took the tax that was requested of Colwood.
Thank you. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
Do
you have a
comment?
Yes, go ahead. You can comment, and then I've got Councillor Parkinson, then Jensen.
It seems on a fairness basis that there should be some level of separation and to protect the existing businesses, not because they innately deserve protection any more than any other business, but because they were set up on the basis that that regulation was in place. And I can quite understand the level of investment being shaped by that protection. And while we might have wished that that protection was never there, or we may not have done, the fact is that it was there, and it shaped people's financial plans and their feelings of security around those plans. And that's a pretty big upset for a business to suddenly realize the whole basis of your business plan has gone. On the other hand, we're told that this was popular with the public when the province was polling the public. What I'd like to know is, when I say this was popular, I mean the idea of being able to buy liquor in grocery stores. Is it popular with our public? And I don't know that. Therefore, I find it hard to judge whether the community really wants this and would be prepared to see those businesses lose the value in order that they would find it easier to buy alcohol.
I've got Parkinson, Jensen, and then Day. Just before Councillor Parkinson, may I ask a staff member to go into the hall and turn on the lights? I'm just worried as people start to exit and stuff, they're not exiting through the darkness. Councillor Parkinson?
Seems to me, from what I read and what I understand, is that we're trying to hit a moving target here, that I don't think the grocery store rules are necessarily in place. And you know, if you buy a bottle of wine, you can buy it off the shelf, but it seems coming down the pike pretty quickly with all the international negotiations and this and that, that it's not, grocery stores are not going to be limited to just selling BC wines on their shelves, that they're going to, pretty soon they're going to be able to sell everything, and maybe they can now with some licenses. So I don't understand. So I guess I'm struggling with, do I care if I get a bottle of wine with my steak in the same store? Is that different than if I can get a bottle of gin and a steak in the same store? Or do I want the gin to be in what they called sort of separate areas where only 19 over within a store model, I think they call it? And I guess the question is it settled yet what the government's going to say as far as what grocery stores can sell, or is that still evolving?
I think, Mr. Mayor, I start off by saying, yes, there has been some changes with respect to what is restricted to be sold at the grocery store. As I understand that it's not just VQA wines, which was the previous restriction. But suffice to say, the rule that provides for wine in grocery stores is expected to stay. There isn't currently a grocery store taking advantage of it in Colwood. So what's most likely to change for residents of the area is potentially a grocery store being built at the Colwood Corners development that would include potentially wine sales. But we don't expect that regulation to, there's nothing coming out of the province with respect to that being taken away.
the NAFTA thing that you couldn't restrict sales in grocery stores to just local wine, that California had to be able to sell wine, and does that then translate into Italy's got to be able to sell gin and vermouth? So it's just, to me, it's confusing, where we're going here and what it's going to look like. And I just wonder if we're a little premature trying to set rules. If we set a rule that makes infinite sense, if somebody's selling VQA wines and then next week they're also selling California and then they're selling everything. And I don't have an answer or a strong feeling one way or the other, but I just feel like I don't know what we're working on here.
Councillor Jensen, then Day.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm left with some questions as well, and we had a great presentation from a local business owner, and I support small business. I support business in our community as the chamber rep, but we've heard from one aspect of this, and we haven't heard from any of the grocery retailers on what their position might be. Maybe it's a non-issue, and none of them intend to sell any wine out of there, or maybe we will, as Councillor Parkinson suggests, be able to buy our Coors Light when we pick up our steaks in the near future. So it's a little murky, and I'm hesitant to apply some very restrictive legislation before the development process, certainly at Colwood Corners, evolves, and paint ourselves into a corner where we have to change something down the road.
Thank you. And just before I go to Councillor Day, I do just want to reinforce with Council that the staff report or the recommendation for consideration is for us just to receive it and take no action. Councillor Day.
Thank you. I guess in my time on council, I've heard quite a few, quite a lot of public participation about the location of liquor stores, the hours of liquor store, and the difficulty for people who choose not to have alcohol in their lives being constantly confronted with it. And I realize that it's not our rules, it's the province's rules that are coming down the pipe. But a lot of the grocery stores, liquor stores that have storefront operations evolved from an off-sales location at a neighborhood pub that has since moved away. And like the regulations have really walked down the road and left a legacy of where these businesses are operating. So I'm very torn because we really did have, we've had a few, over the years when I've been on council, we've had a few presentations, both from local pubs who've explained how critical the off-sales are to their viability as a pub. And we've also recently had a presentation from a local business owner who is very concerned about their future viability because of this changing walking regulations that seem to be, sliding. It used to be, if you had a pub, well, then you could have off sales. Well, then if your off sales were going to be with your pub, they could be out of the back of your pub with a cooler. And then, well, that could be, a block away. And then it could be half a mile away. Now it doesn't matter how close it is. So there's been a lot of regulatory changes. And I would just really like to see us take seriously the concerns of our small businesses and get some feedback from our public on how they would like it to be.
Thank you. Councillor Logan, Baxter, then Kobayashi.
Thank you, Worship. I'll be supporting the staff recommendation. And it's a bit of a struggle because I support both the two small businesses that are lobbying for this change. Because I enjoy actually their selection. Bottom line is their selection outdoes anything that you could buy in a grocery store. But nonetheless, I look back and I think it wasn't that long ago that you went to a grocery store to buy groceries and there wasn't a pharmacy there. Now there's pharmacies. You went to a pharmacy and there wasn't groceries there. Now there's groceries. So we're talking kind of the same, the same thing. I think Councillor Jansen pointed out that we haven't heard the other side of the equation, and so did Councillor Day as well, from the public's point of view, but from the grocers' point of view as well. But I think, I buy my steak at Glenwood Meat, and then I go to a separate liquor store to buy my case of beer or a glass of wine. Even though I may be going to the superstore to buy the potato that'll be going on the barbecue, and so I think it boils down, to selection and choice and getting the full story from the other players in the game.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter, then Kobayashi.
Responding to Councillor Parkinson, I would say that as we don't know exactly what the regulations governing the sale of liquor will be at these grocery stores, the simple way to look at this is whatever they sell that is normally sold in a liquor store is going to be a disadvantage to the existing liquor stores. And if it's very restricted what they sell, then it's a small disadvantage. And I would actually probably be okay with that because it's part of this walking rather than a big sudden change which might come about. However, I don't think we're going to be able to see to the end of a NAFTA objection. I don't think staff are going to be able to tell us the outcome of that. I don't think anybody can. Therefore, perhaps the safe thing to do is to put in place the restriction because we can remove it once it becomes clear that we should. Similarly with Councillor Jensen, who says that it might be that he wants to see if anybody builds one before putting in the regulations. Well, then it's too late. You've already induced somebody to do the work to create this additional outlet. And also referring back to my issue of not knowing where the public stands on this, and as Councillor Jensen says, not really knowing where the existing grocery stores stand, it occurred to me that maybe the right thing to do is to propose adding these regulations and ask for input from all concerned parties. Because we may be in the situation where we've heard from the liquor outlets because they know what's coming and are very concerned about it. Our public may be concerned about it once they know more about it, but they need the time to find out about it, and they need us to be ready to put in the regulation if that is what indeed what they want. They want their local businesses protected as they are. In response to Councillor Logan, I would say there was no regulation preventing grocery stores selling pharmacy, over-the-counter pharmacy ever, as far as I know, or vice versa with the pharmacy stores. So it's a different situation. There was no regulation, and those retail stores did not set up thinking they had a monopoly, or if they did it with no reason to. So I ask Council to support a resolution to introduce these regulations, but with a hesitation before actually proceeding with implementation to give chance for everybody to respond.
Thank you. So I'm going to come to, sorry, Councillor Kobayashi. I just would like to get clarification. So I want to clarify this because what I have in front of me, the recommendation from staff, and I want to be clear on this, is that the staff report titled Review of Liquor Store Retail Store Land Use Regulations dated April 15, 2019 be received and no further action So we're basically saying, listen, here's the review, take it. But that doesn't mean we're changing anything here. We seem to all be arguing that we're making some sort of significant change. And the recommendation, and maybe this council is going to go in a different direction, but staff's recommending that we just receive it and we don't do anything. So we seem to all be talking about something which we all seem to be on the same side here. But anyways, Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On that note, instead of continuing with the argument, I'd like to make the motion, please.
Thank you. Okay, so I have Councillor Kobayashi moved it, Councillor Jensen seconded it. Any discussion on it? Councillor Baxter.
Your Worship, there is something going to change, and we're not going to do it necessarily, but the province is going to change the rules. At least we think they are. And therefore, we need to change the rules in response to that if we're to protect these businesses, or not if we just want to let the businesses blow in the wind because we think it's more important to have it the other way.
Thank you. Just clarification, I do not believe that that's what the motion says. Councillor Kobayashi. This motion? That motion doesn't say that we should change.
No, the motion says we will change nothing.
Correct.
But the province will change something. So
Right,
I'm
we don't have
proposing
to
we should change
the province.
something in response.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I can give a different perspective, too. I was a small business owner right in Colwood. And, it comes down to the principle, we're not here to plan the businesses. We have no business in this. This is free enterprise. I owned a cafe restaurant. I couldn't stop one from building across the street from me. So if you start legislating things like this, here's the principle. You start legislating, then the next thing you know, do we do this for restaurants? Do we do it for the dental offices? Do we start planning like this? We have no business in this. This is free enterprise. Sorry, my thoughts.
We would have ever supported it. I think, I agree with you on the free enterprise. But the free enterprise issue has already been taken away. And liquor stores have invested on the basis of the rules that were in place, and now those rules are about to be destroyed with no warning and no guarantee of any gradualness of the destruction.
Thank you. I'm not going to belabor it, but I won't be supporting the motion to just receive this. And my reasoning is this. Liquor is a controlled substance. It's a controlled substance for a reason. It had a regime that regulated it. It does lots of damage within communities. It's something that I've certainly heard from members of the municipality that they are concerned about the effects of a proliferation of any number of, whether it's cannabis or alcohol or any other endeavor that has a health impact. And we do regularly wade into those areas. The landscape is changing. We have an opportunity to set some limitations on what our community looks like, as in, is there going to be a store like that on every corner? Is alcohol going to be available everywhere? And we have an opportunity to at least go as far as getting input from our community on how they would like our community to look in regards to that. So I think that at the very least we could have brought forward a regulation and then looked for public participation on how does that impact you, and without being heavy-handed and treating everyone the same. So I won't support us just receiving it and doing nothing with it. It was a lot of work to get to this point. I think that our community should be involved.
All right. Seeing no other discussion, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Please note that Councillor Baxter and Day opposed. Uh, 8.8, scheduling of censure and sanctioning hearing. On January 22nd, 2019, Council requested that staff schedule a censuring hearing to address Councillor Day's contravention of the city's code of ethics policy. This process arose from the comments made to the media by Councillor Day on December 3rd and 5th and subsequent interviews with the media, which resulted in the following resolution being adopted on January 22nd, 2019. That following concerns expressed to and by members of council about the actions taken by Councillor Cynthia Day in response to the council-directed work conducted on the public lands fronting Charnley Place on December 3rd and 5th, 2018, and statements made to the media by Councillor Day about staff. Council have directed the matter to a censure hearing under the city's Code of Ethics policy. Councillor Day has requested that the hearing commence after other ongoing processes have completed, and I understand both of these processes have concluded, which is why this item is on the agenda for council's consideration. From a process perspective, the next step is to set the date for the hearing. Once a date is determined, a council report will be prepared and provided to Councillor Day and other members of council, a minimum of 2 weeks prior to the meeting date established. It is important that all members of council are present for this hearing, and I have 3 dates to put on the table for consideration. The proposed dates are based on known availabilities for council members. Can I ask that each of you indicate if you are available for these following 3 dates, or do any of these dates create a conflict for you? I'm going to offer these dates one at a time. Councillor Day, we recognize that you will need to be speaking to other legal people, so that I do not expect for you to confirm that these dates are available for you or not yet. You'll be doing that through staff. Or if you know today, you can let us know. So the first date is Thursday, May 30th, 2019 at 7 p.m. Councillor Parkinson, do you have a conflict then? Okay. Councillor Logan?
What day of the week is that?
Thursday, May 30th. Okay. Councillor Jensen? Councillor Kobayashi? You have a conflict. Okay. Thank you. The second is Wednesday, June 5th at 7 p.m. We'll start it the other way. We'll go there. Councillor Baxter? No, yes, correct. Wednesday, June 5th at 7 p.m. Okay. Councillor Day, do you know? If you don't know, you don't know. Okay. Councillor Kobayashi?
I am available.
Okay. Councillor Jensen? Councillor Logan? Councillor Parkinson? Okay, thank you. And then finally, Thursday, June 6th. Councillor Parkinson, Thursday, June 6th at 7 p.m. Yes? Yeah. Councillor Jensen? Okay, Councillor Kobayashi?
Yes, I am.
Okay, Councillor Baxter?
Available.
Okay, so we have 2 dates. I'm looking to staff. It's 2 dates. Should I search for a 3rd date? Okay, the 27th is definitely out. I'm just looking at dates where people have told me that they are not available. So yeah, May 28th. I don't know what day of the week that is. That's a Tuesday. You have availability? Yeah. No, 28th. Not available. Okay. 29th. Cynthia, did you want to say something about that? 28th, or did you?
Just that I am still awaiting documentation.
Right. Oh, okay.
So I don't know when that's going to be available. I've been working hard at trying to get it.
Okay, then I will stop for a moment because we are not supposed to be proceeding until all the documentation's in place. I was told by staff earlier today that there was nothing waiting. I don't know. I'm not sure how you want to deal with this.
No, I'm still waiting for documentation.
Sorry, I'm looking to staff.
Okay.
Staff is not aware of anything that's outstanding, but if Councillor Day did want to communicate with me outside of this meeting, if there's something specific, I can certainly look at that, but at this point, everything has been concluded.
So all I can say at this point in time is that I have clearly articulated that I have not received what I need, and that I have been working to clarify what I need, and it has been very difficult to assemble the documentation, and I don't know what else I could do about that except try to clarify what I need and why.
Okay. I am at an impasse because I am receiving completely contradictory information from yourself and from my staff, or our staff, excuse me, the city staff. And so I'm not sure. I think what I will do is I will proceed with dates, and then we will clarify and then come back at the next council meeting to clarify that you have received or not received that information. So I'll be able to follow up on that. So we are back to, I am looking, you are not available the Tuesday, the 29th. So I guess we're looking at 28th, excuse me. Then we will look at Wednesday the 29th. Councillor Parkinson, are you available Wednesday 29th? Yes. Okay, thank you. Yes. Jensen? Yes. Correct. Oh, you're away the whole week. Okay.
Your Worship, is there anything that says it couldn't happen on a regular council or committee Monday and then reschedule that council meeting to,
Yep,
or reduce the agenda, just to make it easier for folks?
Okay. Staff? I will look to staff for advice on that one. Changing the date to the 27th, which is the council evening. How, if we were to do that, would we want, I'm assuming we would not want to do both at the same evening. So if we did the censure hearing on May 27th, then we would look at a council meeting maybe May 28th? Yeah? Okay. So we'll look at that. Again, none of these dates are firm right now, so I'm not going to change the May 28th or May 27th council meeting just yet. So we have those three dates. So I have 3 dates, which are May 27th, Monday, May 27th, Wednesday, June 5th, and Thursday, June 6th. Can I please get a motion to direct staff to arrange for the censure hearing based on the feedback received on those 3 dates? Thank you. Moved by Councillor Kobayashi, seconded by Councillor Jensen. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Councillor Day, did you oppose?
I'm opposed.
Okay. Please note that Councillor Day opposed. And that looks like it's it. Am I required to do anything else, staff? Looks like that's clean. All right. Then I am going to move on to bylaw number 9.1, bylaw number 1754, land use bylaw amendment number 166, text amendment, final reading.
Move final.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Logan, second by Kobayashi. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Bylaw number 1759, land use bylaw number 167, CD 13 zone, Latoria and Bazante. Thank you. First and second reading only.
Move first.
Moved by Baxter, second by Logan. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Moved by Kobayashi, second by Parkinson. Discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. 9.3, bylaw number 1760, 5-year financial plan 2019 to 23, final reading.
Move final.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Day. Second by Kobayashi. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Bylaw number 1761, tax rate bylaw. I'm just looking at it from a title standpoint. There's a report for Director of Finance, and then there's a bylaw number 1761, first, second, and third reading. Do I need to do anything with the report?
It may result in the motion.
I'm sorry?
It may result in the motion, the report to amend at this reading or the next reading.
I'm sorry, I missed it. You went right over my head.
Okay.
Sorry.
Could we have the Director of Finance speak to the report?
Oh, yes, thank you. Sorry, I just didn't hear you. Sorry, man. To our Director of Finance.
Thank you, Your Worship. The next step in the financial planning process is to adopt a tax rate bylaw. Staff have prepared a tax rate bylaw consistent with a financial plan, which sees a 2.9% tax increase. Staff have allocated that tax increase evenly among all property classes. There has been some discussion at the council table regarding shifting the burden of taxes from one property class to another, so those options have been included in the tax rate bylaw. I should just mention that staff were asked why are staff recommending to distribute the tax increase evenly among all property classes. The answer to that is simply that tax policy is a council decision, tax fairness is a council decision, so absent of clear direction to adjust the burden in property classes, that's what staff recommendations are going to be. If it's the will of council to shift the burden in any direction, staff would proceed with that. I'll just note that the options in the report, the terminology is likely confusing because it's a little bit off. It says shifting from residential class to business, but really these options represent shifting of tax burden from the business class to the residential class. That's what's being displayed there. If council chooses to shift the taxes according to any of the options, the bylaw draft will need to be amended after first reading, but before second reading. I have the wording of the resolution that would be required. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any questions regarding the report? Councillor Baxter?
I'd like to move option 1 so we can have a discussion around it.
Okay. So we have a mover.
Just a question. My electronic agenda is not working properly, and I picked up a package, and I don't have.
Do we know what
recommendation?
Do we have page recommendation numbers for paper copies? Page numbers for the paper copy, so that Councillor Day could look at it.
I'm looking at.
Oh, you got it now? Okay. Oh, okay. Never mind. We got it. So I've got option A that has been moved by Councillor Baxter, but I do not have a seconder presently. Do I have a seconder?
Option A.
I'll let everybody read it. Oh, thank you. Councillor Parkinson has seconded it. Is there any discussion on this, or can I call the question? Councillor Baxter?
Talking to Mr. Payne and thinking about this, it seems that Colwood has a very high multiplier because our commercial land is probably less valued than, say, in Langford, their commercial land. These things are complicated and hard to sort out, but it appears to be that's the case. I know that a lot of business people point to that very high multiplier as Colwood's not open for business. Colwood's not trying to attract business because they have this very high multiplier. They're trying to soak business, basically. And yet the numbers in this report disprove that. In that we actually are the true tax on business is not higher than anywhere else. I think Councillor Kobayashi is going to disagree with me, and I look forward to that, quite frankly. Oh no, he's agreeing with me. So I think in order to change the message to business and in order to perhaps make our business land a bit more valuable, although it probably won't have that big an effect, I suggest that we adopt option one as a small move to move our multiplier more in line with the rest of the region. We are the highest in the region. A large move will have a large impact on residential properties. Therefore, I think very small moves over a period of time can change the situation without inconveniencing anybody. That's why I'm moving option one.
Okay, thank you. If I don't see any other, just, yeah, well, hold on. Oh, no, are you, oh, I thought you were coming to tell me something. I thought, oh, this is going to be good. You may. Oh, sorry, Mike. Do you have your mic on?
I think this kind of discussion should have been done a lot sooner, because it's a major shift in the municipality's direction, especially when we're looking at a tax increase. If we use option one, the tax increase to the property owned, to the residential, will be 3.15%, when if we go with the option 5, it'll be 2.9%. That's the number that we have been using to portray how we move forward in 2019. But I think the discussion that Councillor Baxter is talking about, I think, is a very useful one, because there's a possibility that there should be a shift. But at this nth hour, I don't think it's a good discussion to have.
Okay, thank you. I will go back to Councillor.
I have a response to that.
I'm going to go to Councillor Day first, because Day hasn't had a chance to speak yet.
Okay.
So, while I recognize that it's a fairly modest proposal to try to address an issue that we've certainly heard about before, the relationship between promoting business and tax rates is non-existent. And we've been through this before in looking at successful economies and comparing. That the tax rate has not been a good indicator of how successful businesses were going to be. I'm not saying that we don't want to support business. I'm certainly interested in supporting businesses to exist in Colwood and doing everything we can to support them to continue to exist in Colwood. I just don't think tax rate's the place to do that.
Thank you. All right. Sorry, I'm sorry, Councillor Baxter.
I did actually bring this up right at the beginning of the entire budget discussions, and I was told that that was inappropriate at that time, that I should bring it up when we discussed the tax rate bylaw, which is now. And the fact that I brought it up originally, when it was at a time when we were asked for ideas about the budget, and that's the one I put forward. And because I brought it up then is why the CFO has written the report this way, because I did at that time ask for options. Now, I would have been happy to discuss those options a month ago, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, but this is the time that staff chose. So I think we need to discuss it now.
So, thank you. So, I just want to reinforce one thing with the comments of our CAO. We have aggressively been messaging through our communications department that it was going to be a 2.9% tax lift. So just so that you're clear, we're going to be communicating something much different moving forward to the residential, that it will be closer to 3.4 if this motion moves forward. Councillor Parkinson.
So I really do support everything you're saying here, Michael, but then I go back to what you said earlier about the VICC conference, where they spoke about strategic plans and how they should sort of go beyond the end of a term. And I go, boy, does this ever speak what a wise thing that is. And if nothing else comes out of tonight, let's make sure that we have a strategic plan that guides the next council for its first year, so that these discussions can happen on a timely basis. You know, are we too late to make this change now? Well, it is kind of the 11th hour, I get. Could we have talked about it any other time for the last 3 months? I kind of think we could have, but we didn't. And So I think I'm going to go with a 2.9% reluctantly.
All right. I'm going to allow council. This is your last chance, because then I'm going to call the question. So, Mr. Baxter.
I'd actually.
Nobody else is asking questions. Hence the reason that
I'd like to withdraw this motion. I'd like to withdraw this motion. Make a different motion.
Okay. You want to withdraw it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I can see which way the wind's going. It was not my choice to discuss this tonight, but I have been placed here, and apparently the conditions have been created to prevent this being discussed. So I move option 5, as recommended by staff, but with the addition that the tax rate bylaw be discussed, in theory at least, right at the beginning of the budget process for next year, so that it can actually be discussed. Because the situation we've had this year is that there is no time when it can be discussed.
Right.
We're being asked to pass a bylaw that we're told we cannot discuss. I think that's inappropriate, to say the least. Therefore, next year, let's have it discussed right at the beginning of the budget process, even though I know that we will be told there is no bylaw in existence, so we can't discuss it, but we need to have the theoretical discussion so we can issue instructions to the CFO to make the appropriate changes when he creates the budget. Thank you.
Thank you. So moving forward, I would like to have a motion, and then you can argue your motion after.
Oh, sorry, I've made the motion.
Yeah, so thank you. So we have a motion and seconder. Now we have discussion. Yeah, and we heard you. Is there any other discussion on this? So just as a clarification, I want to just clarify this with staff. Once this vote is happening, then I'm going to bylaws, correct? We are not in bylaws, correct? Okay, so I'm calling the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried? Which jumps us back to bylaw number, we're on 9.4, bylaw number 1761. I need first, second, and third reading. Moved by Kobayashi and seconded by Jensen. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried? Logan and Parkinson. Discussion? You guys good? I'm just waiting for these two. You guys are good? Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried? Somebody move third. Thank you. Moved by Jensen, seconded by Parkinson. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Moving on to 9.5. Bylaw number 1762, Colwood Sewer Utility. There is a report from our Director of Finance. You want to speak to it?
I've got no further comment, Your Worship.
No comment.
Into questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there any questions regarding the report? If not, then I will move on to bylaw number 1762, first, second, and third reading. Thank you, Logan, and second by Kobayashi. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried? Kobayashi moves it. Parkinson seconds. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried? Thank you, Logan and Jensen. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried? Motion to go in camera. Moved by Logan, second by Parkinson. All those in favor? Okay.